Hey guys, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today we're going to be showing you how to install the DeeMaxx disc brake kit for triple axle trailers here on our 2025 Grand Design Momentum. If your triple axle trailer, whether it's a toy hauler or not, just really isn't giving you that braking power that you're really looking for with those electric drum brakes, then disc brake setup is going to be the right fit for you. Over the years, most of the vehicles out on the road have all switched over from a drum brake setup over to a disc brake setup just because it has so much more braking power and the maintenance on it is going to be a whole lot easier. It's a little harder to see from out here, but you can see on the inside we have extra holes in our rotor. The big thing about disc brakes is that there's a lot more heat dissipation, whereas those drum brakes are just going to sit there and keep heating up. All those excess holes in there kind of let all that heat dissipate out, and it also helps in wet weather conditions because it's also going to kind of fling that water out, whereas drum brakes, it's just going to kind of suck it into the drum, and then it's just going to end up rusting out your components a lot quicker. As far as maintenance goes, it's going to be a whole lot easier than your typical drum brake setup. You're not replacing as many components as often. Usually with that disc brake or the drum brake setup, you're replacing not only the drum and the hub, you're also replacing that brake assembly pretty often. On this, all you're really going to have to replace is just those brake pads inside of there, and this isn't going to require a mechanic to do. This is something you could easily just do at home. If you look later on in our installation side of this, I'll show you exactly how to pop those brake pads out, pop in some new ones, and you can get your trailer up and running. Taking a little look at our assembly back here at our axle, we're going to have DeeMaxx's rotor and hub kit, which is going to have DeeMaxx's max coating all over it, which is going to give you a 1,000-hour salt spray rating. That coating is also on our brake caliper mounting bracket and our brake caliper itself, so that way we can keep that nice and clean. We don't want that corroding over time, especially if you're using this in a marine application. When we take a closer look at our brake pad, so this is going to be the painted back, and it's going to have your Kevlar pad on it. When we take another look at the pad, you can see this is kind of that like yellowish color in there. If you look at a ceramic brake pad, you're going to have a dark gray. This is a little bit rougher. As you can see, it is also a bit thicker. Ceramic does do pretty well at braking power, so it is going to be a little bit better than Kevlar, but the trade-off here is that this Kevlar has a lot more heat dissipation. These ceramic brake pads can get ruined by heat, and then what happens is you're losing your braking power. Another step that DeeMaxx took was that they ran a chamfer in, and they have these little outlets right here, which is going to help dissipate any kind of noise, because usually with disc brakes, especially like on your car, you'll kind of get that squeaking noise as they rub against the rotor. Having that in there kind of cuts out that vibration, and it breaks it up to where it's not going to hit that every single time, and it's going to kind of quiet it down. Taking a closer look at our caliper, we have two bleeder valves. DeeMaxx also does a great job by adding in this little rubber cap that helps protect it, keep any contaminants from kind of getting in there. Pop that off, and it can kind of spin around too, so you can have it get out of your way whenever you are bleeding the brakes. If you don't know exactly how a caliper works, what happens is these pistons right here are going to press and compress those two brake pads onto the rotor. So as the rotor starts spinning, that's going to compress down and grip this nice and tight and give you that braking power. Now what happens is over time, these brake pads start to wear down, and then you're going to start needing more fluid in your actuator. So why don't we go take a look at the actuator, and I can explain a little bit more about how that works. So our actuator is going to come with a fully sealed all aluminum housing here, and that's going to help prevent any foreign contaminants from getting in and ruining our brake fluid and possibly affecting our brake power at the back. It's going to have a 360-degree fitting that's actually pretty nice. Most places, or most actuators aren't going to come with a 360-degree fitting, and it's going to be typically in the back. So it is kind of hard sometimes when you're setting these down and trying to figure out where you can actually mount it. This being 360 and allowing you to kind of adjust it as needed made it so much easier to install. Now with that 15.7 fluid ounce reservoir, that's probably going to be enough for your triple axle and under. If you do have a quad trailer or quad axle trailer, you might want to switch up to the G1600X. This just has a larger reservoir built into it, but it's still the same technology, still the same housing. Everything's all the same, just that larger reservoir. So with that, it also will take up quite a bit more space. So you might have to do a little bit more planing whenever you're doing your install, but that's going to help push all that fluid forward, or backwards I should say, and it's going to give you the option to put a little bit more fluid in it, so that way as your brake pads start to wear down, it still has that extra fluid to kind of push back and fully push those pistons in and compress the brake pads onto the rotor. The actuator is going to require 12-volt power, so you will need to tie that in with your tow vehicle. That's going to run through the 7-way to get that power, and it's going to also require an electric over hydraulic compatible brake controller. Now, most people don't always have that. A lot of people have a factory brake controller. You're going to want to switch away from that because there's just typically a lot of issues kind of trying to communicate with that factory brake controller to the electric over hydraulic actuator. So if you need help picking out a brake controller, make sure you hit us up either with a comment, email, or question, and we'd be happy to set you up with the right brake controller to make sure that your DeeMaxx actuator is actually going to respond. So if you take a closer look at the cap, it actually says use .3 or .4. .4 is definitely recommended over .3 for this. And it'll even say it multiple times all over the unit. Taking a look at our brake lines, we're going to have a few different lengths of flexible hose. Now, typically with disc brakes, most people aren't going to want to use a flex line. There's a whole lot of debate on whether a flex line is better or a hard line is better. Personally, I do prefer hard line just because I can cut it to fit. I don't have to try and work exactly how I set my T's up and where I mount everything based on, you know, where the cross members are here. I can actually screw into metal. With this one, I had to get a little creative just because our flex lines weren't matching up exactly with how the trailer has its cross beams. So it took a little bit more time to do, and you know, it might not be the prettiest, but like I said, DeeMaxx has done all the testing. They've proven that their lines are strong enough to withhold it. They can stand up to the elements, especially with being under your trailer. You're going to be kicking a lot of stuff up and hitting that underbelly, hitting those brake lines, especially the one that's closest to your assembly. That guy's going to probably get the most stuff kind of flung at it, or the abuse that you're going to see as you drive around. One of the nicer things that DeeMaxx does with their fittings, though, is they give you a little bit of space right here. On some other ones, it's a challenge to really get your wrench in there. So with a line wrench, you weren't really able to get in there and get a good grip on this and then be able to get it off. So you might find that, you know, it's a huge challenge to try and get your other brake lines in if you didn't have all that space like we do with the DeeMaxx. The brass fitting right here is going to be 3/16 in diameter, and then our thread size is going to be 3/8. The hose itself on the inside under all that rubber is going to be 1/8 inch thick. Swapping out the hub and rotors, super simple. I mean, it's pretty much the same as if you were doing a drum brake setup. You're just greasing your spindle and your bearings, and you're getting that all hopped onto the spindle. But when it comes to the brake lines, that can be a little bit more challenging because you are going to have to kind of figure out exactly where that you got a good spot to mount to. With these being flexible soft lines, you're not able to just kind of cut it to fit and then mount your T's exactly where you need them to be. So this might take a little bit more planning, especially when you're mounting your actuator. That also does require quite a bit of planning just because you never know what's going to be up at the front of the trailer that you're going to have to try and fight around, and then running all your hoses out back to the assemblies. And if you need help doing that, you can bring it up here to eTrailer, or you can check out our dealer locator to find a shop near you that can help get you set up. So starting off our installation, preparation is going to be the key here. You want to make sure that you have plenty of room. You're definitely going to need a lot of gloves. You're going to need a lot of shop towels because there's going to be a lot of grease going on once we switch over to our new rotor and hub. We've also gone ahead and we've secured jack stands at each point on our frame at the front and the back on each side. That way we can support our trailer, get it up off the ground so we can have our wheels loose. I've gone ahead and already broke each of these lug nuts loose. We're going to go ahead, take them all off, pop our wheels off, set them to the side so we can start breaking down our hub assemblies. Now to break down our hub assembly, we're going to need to first take off our dust cap. Usually you can kind of beat these off as you go and kind of keep spinning the hub. With these being so new, they're probably not going to come out too easy. And normally I'd try to save these, but since we're going to be replacing them with our kit, honestly you can just kind of tear these up as you get them off. So I'm going to take a little flathead. I'm going to try to get back behind it. I'm just going to work my way out. You can spin it and then just keep kind of prying as you go around.
All right, with that off, I'm going to go ahead and wipe off a little bit of this, make it a little bit easier to get to the cage. Depending on the brand of your axle, you will either have this little cage right here holding on the nut and the washer, or you could have a pin and clip. If it's Dexter, you're typically going to have this little cage. So we'll just pop that off. This time we are going to save these and our washer and our nut here, just because we are not going to have these included in our kit. But the bearings you can trash, because we're going to have all those included. My channel locks. And once you get that off, you can go ahead and grab the hub from each side. Just kind of rock it side to side, and you'll pop out your washer. I'll throw that to the side. And our bearing is going to pop right out with our hub. Go ahead, we'll set that down. I can just throw my bearing in there because these are going into the scrap. Next, you can take a shop towel, kind of clean up any loose grease. You see there's kind of quite a bit of rust kind of sitting in all that grease on here, so we want to clean that up nice and good. You might want to take a little bit of brake cleaner and just spray some on there and wipe it down real nice. And now's also a good time to check each of your journals on your spindle. We don't want any scratches that we can feel with our fingernail on any of those journals. If you have that, it's time to replace your axle. For our brake assembly, we're going to take out these 5 bolts right here that hold on our assembly. And then on the back side, so this trailer is going to have 2 wires running to our brake magnet. We got a power and ground, and then we also have a electronic sway control that's hooked up to this. On the back of this assembly, which I'll show you in just a sec, has just a little clip you can unplug, and we're just going to save that and tuck it up into the underbelly. So you got it pretty tight. I'm going to have to pull it down. And like I said, you can see those little clip-in connectors. We'll just disconnect both of those, and I'll tuck that up away. The mounting studs or bolts for our brake assembly are also going to get popped out. Just be careful you don't accidentally hit your spindle. In your kit, you're going to have 5 bolts and lock nuts. We're going to go ahead and we'll put a little bit of anti-seize on our bolt. You can just go ahead and put it down one side, just like that. So when mounting your caliper bracket, you're going to go ahead and put this either at the 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock, which is going to be either front or back. We're going to go ahead and we're going to put it towards the back. So I'm going to slip this on. We're going to line up our holes and just stick a couple of the bolts through, get 2 in to kind of hold it in place, and then you can go back and throw on one of the locking nuts. And we'll just repeat the process for the rest of them and start tightening them down. Since there isn't a knurl on this to kind of hold that in, we're going to have to go ahead and stick a second wrench on the back side. And then we'll just start tightening down each of these bolts. Now we're going to go ahead and just torque these down to the specifications listed in the manual. Next, we're going to go ahead and get our rotor and hub assembly set up. We're going to take our inner bearing, that's going to be the larger of the 2, and we're going to grease this up. Now you can do this by hand, or you can pick up a bearing packer like we offer here. You can also typically pick this up at any kind of auto parts store. It's going to make your life a whole lot easier, because instead of sitting there and scraping a whole bunch of grease into it in your palm of your hand, you can just sit here and kind of spin this around, and it's going to work all that grease up in between the rollers of the bearing and give you a pretty good healthy glob along the outside of it too. So you can see we got the grease coming out the top. Go ahead and I'll pick that up out of there. Don't want to bring out too much. We don't need a huge glob on there. But what I'll typically do with all that excess is kind of smear it around, get it nice and lubed up, and then I'll take all that and just kind of rub it on the spindle. We're going to get a whole lot of grease on our hands doing this, so it's definitely good to have some gloves and a whole bunch of shop towels. Next, we can go ahead and drop this right in and work in our grease seal. I'm going to go ahead while I still have my hands all greasy and do the inner bearing or the outer bearing as well. That way I don't have to change out my gloves so many times. All right, next we're gonna go ahead and just kind of do a really light film of grease along the outside of the grease seal. This kind of helps just squeeze it in a little bit better. And they also recommend putting a little bit on the inside rubber seal as well. And then we're going to try and set this in as perfectly flat as we can, because we're going to hammer this into place to prevent our grease from falling out the back. So now we're going to go ahead and take a piece of wood. This is just a flat surface for us to beat down that grease seal with without going past the center of the hub here, because we don't want this to kind of fall in too far. If it does, then you're going to have grease leaking out of this. So we'll set that across. We're just going to lightly kind of tap her in. And kind of just feel, see if it feels level across here. I feel like I got a little bit of a hump right here. All right, that feels a whole lot better. We can go ahead and get this ready to go on our spindle. Now we're going to go ahead and slip on our hub and rotor. Real careful, we want that to go on nice and tight. And then we will go ahead and grab our outer bearing. Pop that right into place. Next is our washer, and with this being a Dexter axle, you're going to have that D washer. Pop that on, and then our nut. And we'll tighten that down so that it seats the bearings. To seat the bearings, we're going to go ahead and do it Dexter's way, since we're using a Dexter axle. Depending on who you talk to, there's going to be a whole different way that you've never thought of to seat that bearing and tighten down that axle nut. So really, it's just kind of whatever you decide you want to go by. With this, we're going to tighten it down to 50 foot-pounds, and then we're going to back it off, because we don't want this super tight, because then it's just going to pinch the bearings, and they're not going to want to glide with the assembly here. We want that about hand tight. And then we're going to take our cage right here, and we're going to pop that on as well. Now you might have to move that nut just a little bit more just to get the cage on. Doesn't always fit on exactly at that tightness. All right, so you can see we're not really getting it on too easy just because it's kind of catching on some spots. We can go ahead and just loosen this up just a little bit. Line up like that. There we go. And that's going to keep that nut from being able to back off. After we have that tight, we can go ahead and kind of see if there's any side-to-side play. I'm not really getting any. It's really important to go ahead and throw on your caliper as well and check all of that with the wheel. We've done a bunch of these installs and found once we get it on, the wheels don't always match up with that caliper and it starts to rub. So we're going to start by throwing that on, and then we're going to also do that wobble test again. We're going to move our piston and sleeve back on our calipers, make sure we got enough room here, so that way when we stick it in the bracket, we don't have to fight it at all. I like to kind of start from the bottom and slap it right up into place. You're going to see there's a little bit of a gap right here. We want to move it back to where that's almost just lined up perfect, and that's how you're going to find that hole on the back side of the bracket. And then that is going to require a 1/2 inch socket or wrench. We're going to go ahead and use our little guy right here. And I'm going to get just one of these started, just make sure that this can't fall out. And I don't want to go all the way down yet, just because I might need a little bit of play so I can get the bottom in place. Then these are going to get torqued down to the specifications listed in the installation manual. It's a little tight with that upper one here, so you might find some issues doing it with just a normal socket. You might have to go get like a crow's foot. All right, I got the wheel back on. I got 2 lug nuts. We can kind of pry on it. I ain't really getting any motion out of it. And now we can check. No issues with our caliper rubbing the inside of the wheel, so we're all good to go. We can go ahead, we'll take our wheel off, and then we're going to do the same exact thing on our other 5 assemblies. Now we have our other side done and all of our assemblies have swapped over. We're going to go ahead and figure out exactly where we can set our actuator, so that way we can figure out how we're going to have to route our lines to each assembly. On fifth wheels, you're typically not going to be able to find exactly where your junction box is too easy. Usually they love to hide it up in the nose of our trailer. We've gone ahead and we've traced it. It comes all the way over to here, comes through a hole inside of our cargo compartment up top, and then it runs down. In this front cargo bay, we have our battery, and we also have a generator, pretty typical with newer fifth wheels now. We're going to go ahead and set our actuator right next to the battery, because this is kind of a decent spot for it. We've got plenty of room around it so it can breathe. We're not going to have anything kind of falling over it, because you really shouldn't have anything in here with the battery. And I've got a nice piece of frame right under this, so I can go right into it and know that I'm hitting metal, and I don't have to worry about this kind of vibrating around or anything like that. So now we can go over, we found the junction box. It's actually on the side up in a little storage compartment, so we'll take you right over there. So here's our junction box. This is a little weird. Most of the time you see a junction box, it's going to be just that metal junction like gang box that you'd see in your house. This time they actually got Wago connectors to put all of it in nice and neat. So we've already kind of gone ahead and figured out what each wire is and marked them. We're going to go ahead and kind of route our wires, because there's an opening right here in the back side of our junction box. So I'm going to go ahead, we'll get that actuator mounted and then start running the wires up to here. I'm going to go ahead and just start out with some self-tappers here. Just kind of make a little bit of a mark of where I want it. And then I'm going to switch and do the other side and then get this out of the way, because my drill is going to fight this the whole way. Can move it back a little bit. Get one on the front and then one on the back. Make sure I'm not crooked here. I need to loosen that up just slightly though. Since I don't have 4 colors here, I'm going to go ahead and just label my blue and use it twice. So I've got plenty of blue wire, and then I've got white and black, and that's probably just about enough to get through. So I'm going to label it on both sides. Now we'll know, if we ever have to come back and look at this, maybe we have an issue down the road, we can always know exactly what that wire's function is. We have our bundle of wires here. We have our black, which is going to be our 12-volt power. This is going to be pulling power from your truck side. We want to make sure that this is only pulling power from the truck, otherwise this could just sit here and drain your battery. The yellow is going to run to our breakaway switch. That way if there ever was a breakaway, it's going to activate and lock up those brakes so you can safely pull over the shoulder. We have our blue wire that is going to be getting power from our brake controller, so every time we step on the brakes or we use our manual override, that's where our power is going to be coming into our actuator. And then the white wire is just going to be our ground. Now I am going to use heat shrink butt connectors in here, but I don't really need to do it at the junction box, because down here there is the chance of moisture. Up in there, probably not as big of a deal. Here's our other wire. They don't really give you that much, in my opinion. They do have it soldered, which is nice, so we can crimp down on that and it's not going to budge. But I'd prefer to have a little bit more. I'm going to try and get the casing off like I did on this one, but without ripping off that solder, just to give it a little bit more to bite into. Take one of our heat shrink butt connectors, we'll pop that right in and crimp her down. Give it a little tug test and just repeat that with the rest of the wires. Now we'll just complete our connection to our actuator. Tug. Take our black. Be careful, you want to make sure that this blue wire right here is going to your brake controller wire and not to the breakaway battery. And switch. We'll go ahead and just heat these up, get those all to close, get a nice seal on our wire. So now that I have all the wiring in place, I'll go ahead and show you how I did it. I had all my wiring come in through that little hole up here. We've got our power wire. I've just spliced that in, running to our 12-volt power. Right next to that, we have our breakaway switch. That's that orange and white wire here, so I just teed right into that with a butt connector. And then next to that, we have our brake control wire. I did go ahead and disconnect the wire that ran out to our old electric brake assemblies. You can leave that here. If ever down the road they wanted to switch back to electric brakes, maybe someone else buys this trailer and doesn't like disc brakes, or they just don't have a setup for it, they could go ahead and reconnect that and be good to go. Further down, we have our ground wire. I got that going all the way down to here. We've got a Wago connector. This whole 4 slots right here is our ground, and also right here. With that being open, it was just too easy to stick it in there and close that. If you didn't have that, you could go ahead and just ground that wire right by the actuator to the frame. You'd have no issues as well. Now with all the wiring in place, we're gonna take our 20-foot hose. We are going to use this 90-degree fitting, and we're gonna attach it to our actuator, and we're gonna run it back. Now before I go ahead and do that, because this is gonna kind of be in the way, I'm gonna drill out my hole for it. I've gone ahead and I've got just big enough of a hole saw to kind of cut through there and have this fit through, but I don't want to go too big because we don't want a huge gaping hole in the way that rodents and other stuff can kind of get through. Once I get that hole in place, because it is metal back there, I'm going to go ahead and take some wire loom and just run that around. And then I also have some gasket maker. We're going to go ahead and fill that hole back in because, like I said, we don't want rodents, we don't want bugs getting inside of our trailer. Now that I got that hole, I'm going to go ahead and take this out. We'll just use our or you can use a Phillips or a flathead just to get this plug out. We'll thread on our 90 here. We're going to thread this all the way back. This is a jam nut. As you can see with our 90 right here, we're going to be putting this into this port and running it straight back. But we want to make sure that we get this all the way on first. So we'll kind of thread this a few times and then we'll get it kind of how we want it and then use the jam nut to secure it in place. Get a nice tight fit. And as you can see, it's starting to almost get there. Pop that down a little bit more, and we can go ahead and tighten that down. We'll use 2 wrenches here to hold this in place. One on the 90 and one on that jam nut. Going from our actuator back to the first axle, we're going to be using the 20-foot line. That's going to be the largest out of the whole bundle there. I'm going to throw it through the backside just because I don't want to run 20 feet through the front right here when I can easily slide under and just put exactly what I need through there. I've hand thread in our fitting a little bit. We're going to go ahead and we'll take a line wrench that's going to have more sides on it there so you can get it nice and tight, get more torque down onto our fitting. A little bit awkward getting it in just because real tight space. So we're not getting big turns here. Now with that fitting tight, I'm going to push the rest of our cable back through that hole and we can kind of figure out exactly where we're going to mount this. There is a lot of stuff on the bottom of your trailer, or this trailer. Go ahead and check out your trailer. You're probably gonna have to finagle around a few things. You might even have to move a couple things on the bottom of your trailer just to kind of get everything nice and secure, because you don't want anything happen to these brake lines. On each of these hoses, you're gonna find on each end, it's gonna have a 3/16 double flare fitting here. That double flare is gonna help seal up. So whether you're going into the brake caliper or into a T, it's gonna pop right in. Now these don't have a lot of threads, at least with the T's, that you'll really have to put in. Once you start getting it tight, what you're gonna wanna look for is, do I have any movement between the T or whatever else I'm tying into in the hose? Let me back it off just a little bit so you can kind of see what I'm saying. So right now I can kind of hear that clicking back and forth. I have a little bit of space in there, and we don't want that because then we're gonna have a leak. So we'll tighten it up until it just gets tight enough, and to do that, you wanna make sure that you're using a line wrench. It's got extra sides on it compared to a normal wrench, so you get a nice tight fitting on that nut.
Starting out at the nose, we came through that wall that leads into our underbelly area. We traced that down the side frame rail here. We actually were able to kind of tap into the trim piece that's holding up the underbelly sheeting until we got up to this point, and then I kind of took it out a little bit. We got a cross beam going that way, and I used that to kind of tighten up some of the slack here and really push this away. I don't like the hose line being anywhere near the suspension. Following that a little bit further, we're going to come up. So the cross beams didn't really line up well for me, just because these hose lengths, there's not much you can really do. There's not enough to fully wind it up, and I can't cut it down to size, so kind of had to make do. Only one of these, I went and got a piece of scrap metal. I screwed that to the frame, and then I screwed our T down to that piece just to kind of hold it. I'm also going to come back and I'm going to zip tie over all of this, make sure it's nice and secure. We don't want any chance of this kind of falling down and getting caught in the suspension. If you look at the hose leading from the T over to our actual assemblies, we have a little bit of slack that is going to be needed because we have 3 inches of travel. As your suspension starts to compress, this is going to move up and down. So if we don't have enough slack, we're just going to rip the hose line out right out of the caliper. Following the other way, we have a much longer line that we took over the other assemblies. We're going to repeat that on each one of these axles and just use that medium size running between each axle. Now past the second axle, you can see here's one of those zip ties. They give you a bunch of really, really nice big ones. Makes it way easier to hold this down and actually feel secure about it. Coming up to this last T, we just have that 3-piece T for the end because we don't have anything going past that. And like I said before, we've got our lines running to our brake assemblies. So on the other side, like I said, we use that longer piece. It's going straight from the T over to that caliper. So what I did was, on this one, I actually used a loom clamp that was already there for their waistline. On the other ones, I just took the loom clamps that they provided and some zip ties and kind of held them in place. Like I said, you want to have a little bit of play, but you don't have so much that it could come down and potentially get caught by something. With all of our connections made, we're going to go back through and just one time check, make sure all of them are nice and tight. Then we're going to go up and we'll fill up our actuator and do a leak test. I put a little bit of fluid in the lines and I've kind of run it a little bit, and I've got another person up front. I'm going to have them keep adding fluid and run the actuator, and we're going to start at the very end of our assembly line here, which is going to be our driver's side on the third axle all the way at the rear. We're going to do this, we'll move over to the other side, then we're going to move up, and we're just going to keep crisscrossing back and forth until we get to the first assembly in this whole line, and we're going to go until we get a nice strong line of fluid out of here with no air bubbles. Now if you're seeing air bubbles, that means you just need to keep pushing fluid through until they're all gone. You don't want to reuse the fluid that you've pushed through and collect it into your container. This top valve is where we're going to bleed the brakes from. We don't want to do the bottom, otherwise we're going to trap air bubbles up top. You can pull that little cap out of the way, get your wrench, and we're just going to loosen this just a bit and pop on our line. You can see some of those smaller air bubbles passing through the line right now. All right, that's good. And before I'm going to tighten this down a little bit.
While doing our bleeding process, we did find a leak coming from right here. Go ahead and tighten it just a bit more. Good way to see if this is leaking at all, if you can't really see it coming off of the fitting itself. Throw a piece of cardboard or some paper towels or something just under each of your connection points, and you can see exactly where it is. So we've gone ahead, we've bled all of our lines. We did have a few issues where we just needed to tighten up those fittings just a tiny bit more with the line wrench, and then we were good to go. Now, just to reiterate, you do want to go from the back assembly up to the front assembly while you're doing this, just to make sure that you're properly bleeding out all of those air bubbles so you don't have any contaminants that could potentially stop your brakes from fully biting into the rotors here and then stopping the trailer. Now that all of that's complete, we can go ahead, we're going to take our grease gun and we're going to lube these up just a little bit. Now, if you've never done this with an easy lube axle, you don't want to sit there and just keep pounding away, because we've had a ton of people where they come to us and they say, hey, I've put about half a tube of grease in here, and now it's, you know, something's not right. I'm not seeing any grease come out the front. It's not always going to come out the front. You really only want to get 2, maybe 3 pumps with the grease gun, because what happens is on the back side, you're blowing your seal out, and then you're just spraying grease all over your brake shoes. If it's an electric or with our electric over hydraulic here, it's going to be all over those brake pads. Then we're replacing our brake pads. Last step here is going to be putting on our dust cap. There's not really anything difficult about this. You just want to kind of make sure it's getting in there nice and straight. You don't want to actually hammer right onto this, because there's a good chance you're going to end up denting this up, because it's not really that thick of a piece of metal there. So I like to take just a piece of wood to kind of prevent any issues and try and hammer that in as nice and straight as you can. Kind of run our rotor back and check. And then we'll just take our plug and pop that into place.
Final step is going to be just torquing the lug nuts on our wheels. Obviously, we got to get the trailer down, so we've moved our jack stands out of the way and retracted the leveling system that is on our trailer. And we're going to go ahead and start with the top. We're going to crisscross, go down to the bottom, and then we're going to work our way across as we go. Typically, you'll see a lot of the newer trailers, they'll put a sticker right by the wheels that has a pattern for you, so you know exactly how to do it. And then they'll also typically write whatever torque rating you have for your specific trailer on there as well. Well, I think that about does it for today's installation of the DeeMaxx disc brake kit for triple axle trailers here in our 2025 Grand Design Momentum. If this video didn't help you, or you still have questions, please feel free to reach out to us with either an email, question, or comment, and we'd be happy to help you out.